Let's talk about something nobody really explains when it comes to money. Your net worth doesn't just change your bank account. It changes how people treat you. And the weird part is, it's usually not obvious at first. Nobody sends you a message saying, "Congratulations, your financial status has officially changed the way I see you." It happens quietly. In conversations, in opportunities, in how seriously people take your opinions, in who suddenly wants to be around you, and sometimes in who starts acting a little different when you say no. Most people think wealth only changes what you can buy, but in reality, wealth changes your level of social leverage. It changes your confidence, your options, and the way people perceive your stability. So in this video, I want to break down the 3 net worth levels where people start treating you differently, and why each level matters way more than most people realize. The first level is a positive net worth. That might not sound exciting. It's not flashy. It's not the kind of thing people post online. But this is the first real turning point because it means you've crossed an invisible line most people never think about. You're no longer just earning money and watching it disappear. You actually own more than you owe. That changes everything. When your net worth is negative, even if you look successful on the outside, there's usually pressure behind the scenes. Debt payments, financial anxiety, decisions being made out of desperation instead of strategy. And people can feel that, even if you never say it out loud. Stress shows up in your tone, your patience, your confidence, and the way you negotiate. But once you hit a positive net worth, even if it's only a few $1,000s, you begin to carry yourself differently. You stop feeling like one emergency away from chaos. You stop making every decision based on immediate survival. And that alone makes people take you more seriously. At this level, friends and family start noticing subtle differences. You're calmer. You're less reactive. You're not constantly complaining about money. And while no one may call it wealth, they start seeing you as responsible, reliable, disciplined. This is the level where people begin to trust you with small opportunities. Maybe someone asks for your advice. Maybe you get introduced to a better job. Maybe you're finally seen as someone who follows through. Not because you're rich, but because you've shown control, and control is attractive. The second level is a 6-figure net worth, somewhere around $100,000. Now this is where the outside world starts paying attention. At this point, you're no longer just doing okay. You've built actual financial traction. A 6-figure net worth usually means you've developed habits that most people never stick with long enough to benefit from: consistent saving, investing, avoiding lifestyle inflation, and thinking long term. This is where people start assuming you know something they don't. You'll notice it in small ways. People ask different questions. Instead of, "How are things going?" they ask, "What do you think about the market?" Instead of seeing you as someone trying to catch up, they start seeing you as someone with momentum. And momentum changes how people interact with you. But there's also a downside. Once you hit this level, people begin projecting things onto you. Some assume you got lucky, others think you must be making way more than you really are. Some may even quietly resent the fact that you're becoming more financially secure while they're standing still. And the uncomfortable truth is that your progress can unintentionally expose other people's lack of action. That's why this level can feel strange. You're not rich enough to be completely free, but you're successful enough for people to treat you differently. Invitations change, expectations change. Even your social circle can shift because your priorities become different. You stop being impressed by status purchases. You stop caring about looking rich. You start caring about cash flow, ownership, taxes, time, and optionality. And when your mindset changes, your conversations change too. This is the level where people may start calling you smart with money, but what they really mean is they can tell you've become more intentional than average. And that's important because average financial behavior is incredibly expensive. The third level is $1 million net worth. This is where the treatment change becomes undeniable. Because once you cross 7 figures, people don't just see you as financially responsible. They see you as financially established. That doesn't mean you're flying private. It doesn't mean you never worry again. But it does mean you've entered a category that most people associate with real wealth, whether that's accurate or not. And once that happens, the way people behave around you starts changing fast. Some people suddenly want your advice. Some want your network. Some want your approval. Some become more respectful. Others become more cautious with what they say around you. And a few will start acting as if your success somehow created distance between you and them, even if you haven't changed at all. That's because money doesn't just reveal your habits. It reveals other people's assumptions. At the $1 million level, the biggest difference isn't the stuff you can buy. It's the freedom you can feel. You can take more risk because you have a cushion. You can say no to bad opportunities. You can walk away from toxic jobs, bad partnerships, and expensive mistakes. That freedom changes your body language. It changes your standards. It changes your tolerance for nonsense, and people notice. When you don't need every conversation to turn into an opportunity, you become more powerful. When you're not desperate for approval, you become more confident. When you don't have to say yes for money, people often respect you more, even if they don't fully understand why. But here's the twist no one talks about. Every level of net worth changes how people treat you. But the most important change should be how you treat yourself. Because if your self-respect only grows after your net worth grows, then money didn't solve the real problem. It just covered it up. The healthiest reason to build wealth is not to impress people. It's to reduce pressure, increase freedom, and create a life where your decisions come from strength instead of fear. A positive net worth gives you breathing room. A six-figure net worth gives you momentum. $1 million net worth gives you options. And options are what people are really responding to. They're not just reacting to your money, they're reacting to your stability, your discipline, your patience, your ability to think long-term in a world addicted to short-term validation. So if you're at level 1, don't underestimate how powerful that foundation is. If you're at level 2, protect your momentum and don't let appearances distract you. And if you're aiming for level 3, remember that real wealth isn't about looking important. It's about being able to live on your own terms. Because in the end, money changes how people treat you. But used correctly, it also changes how much you're willing to tolerate, how wisely you choose your time, and how confidently you build your future. And that might be the biggest upgrade of all. There are a lot of things people say about money. They say money doesn't change you. They say money just makes life easier. They say if people treat you differently because of money, you're around the wrong people. And while all of that sounds good, it's only partially true, because money absolutely changes social behavior. Not always in dramatic ways, not always in obvious ways. But once your net worth starts rising, people begin to respond to you differently. Sometimes out of respect, sometimes out of curiosity, sometimes out of insecurity, and sometimes because they believe your financial position says something about your intelligence, discipline, or status. So let's break down the 3 net worth levels where this starts happening and why understanding this matters if you want to build wealth without letting it distort your identity. The first level is when you move from financially fragile to financially stable. For most people, that happens somewhere between $10,000 and $25,000 in net worth, assuming high-interest debt is under control and there's at least some cash reserve. Now, to the internet, that number sounds small, but in real life, this level is huge. Why? Because this is the point where one bad month usually stops being a disaster. At this stage, you're no longer operating with constant financial panic in the background. You're starting to create space. You can pay bills without checking your account 3 times a day. You can handle small emergencies without borrowing. You can think a little further ahead than next Friday. And the moment that pressure begins to disappear, your presence changes. You talk differently. You negotiate differently. You make decisions differently. You're less needy, less rushed, less emotionally driven, and that alone changes how others respond to you. People start seeing you as dependable, not wealthy, not elite, just solid. This is the level where family members start assuming you're good with money. Coworkers start asking how you budget. Friends start noticing that you're not constantly stressed about every small expense. In other words, your financial life starts giving off a signal. This person is getting organized. That signal matters far more than the number itself, because people don't always respond to money directly. They respond to the behaviors money creates. The second level is a net worth around $100,000 to $250,000. This is where perception shifts in a much bigger way. At this point, you're no longer just surviving well. You're building wealth in a visible, measurable, undeniable way. Whether it came from investing, business income, real estate equity, or aggressive saving, the message is the same. You have traction, and traction changes your social value. When you're building real assets, people assume you're more disciplined than average. They assume you understand delayed gratification. They assume you know how to make decisions beyond just consumption. And whether those assumptions are fully correct or not, they create a new kind of social treatment. People begin to take your opinions more seriously, not because you're automatically right, but because financial progress acts like proof of concept. It tells the world that at least in one area of life, you've figured something out. This is where you may notice a split in the way people respond to you. One group becomes inspired, they ask questions, they want to learn, they become more intentional after seeing your progress. The other group becomes uncomfortable. They may joke about your frugality, they may downplay your discipline, they may call you lucky because admitting your results came from consistency would force them to question their own habits. And that's the part of wealth building that rarely gets discussed. Growth changes your relationships because not everyone wants the same future you want. At this level, something else happens too. Your standards increase. You start valuing time more than appearances. You stop trying to look rich and start trying to stay rich. You become less interested in expensive validation and more interested in ownership. A paid-off asset becomes more exciting than a luxury purchase. A growing brokerage account becomes more satisfying than a designer logo. That mindset shift is powerful and people notice it. The third level is a net worth of $1 million and above. This is the level most people mentally label as real money, even though in many cities, $1 million doesn't buy the kind of lifestyle people imagine. Still, socially, the label matters. Once people think of you as a millionaire, even if much of that net worth is tied up in investments or home equity, the treatment changes. You're no longer viewed as someone doing well, you're viewed as someone who has made it. And that perception creates a whole new set of reactions. Some people become more respectful, some become more interested, some become more transactional. They want your advice, your attention, your connections, or your approval. And sometimes the hardest part is figuring out who genuinely likes you and who simply likes what they think being around you could do for them. That's why higher levels of wealth don't just require financial intelligence. They require social intelligence. Because once money becomes visible, intention becomes harder to read. At this stage, you also gain something much more valuable than luxury: leverage. You can wait longer. You can negotiate harder. You can walk away faster. You can refuse bad deals, bad clients, bad jobs, and bad environments because you're no longer operating from urgency. And when people realize you don't need anything from them, the dynamic changes immediately. Neediness weakens your position. Optionality strengthens it. That's why wealth often looks like confidence from the outside. Not because money magically gives someone a better personality, but because financial security removes the pressure that makes people tolerate things they shouldn't. Now here's the most important point in all of this. If you build wealth only to change how people treat you, you'll never feel satisfied for long. Because external treatment is unstable. Some people will admire you, some will envy you, some will misunderstand you, some will expect more from you just because you have more, and no amount of money fully protects you from that. What wealth does best is not changing other people, it's changing your margin for error. It gives you room to breathe, room to think, room to choose, room to recover, and those are the things that make you harder to control. So yes, there are absolutely 3 net worth levels where people start treating you differently. The first is stability, the second is traction, the third is leverage. And with each level, the outside world responds in new ways. But if you're smart, you won't chase wealth for attention. You'll chase it for independence. Because the real flex isn't getting strangers to treat you like you matter. The real flex is building a life where your peace, your schedule, your choices, and your future are no longer controlled by financial pressure. And once that happens, people will treat you differently. But more importantly, you'll stop settling for less than you deserve.